two different sets of investment bankers said that my client was worth close to $100 million. 18 months ago, we went out to market to evaluate how much his business was worth, and they said $35 million. I said, I think we should wait. I think in 3 years, you'll be worth $100 million, but it actually took less than a year.
Most creators think brand deals are the goal, but that's the trap, and it's costing them years. Tyler Chou spent 2 decades inside Hollywood studios and top law firms, and now helps some of YouTube's biggest creators build companies that outlive the algorithm. Known as the creator's attorney, she shows digital talent how to protect their IP, scale beyond ads,
Your YouTube channel is not your business. It is the marketing arm of your business.
and turn attention into ownership before burnout or bad deals take it all.
Jenny Hoya is the queen of shorts. She grew from like nothing to 10 million. She was 17 when I first started representing her. These are young creators without anyone kind of going to bat for them.
What are the most common gaps when you're working with creators?
So many creators need an adult in the room. If your YouTube channel goes down tomorrow, then you're not making any money.
Tell me about the steps that it took you to go from that first video that blew up to saying, you know what, this is my new mission.
I don't know that I've shared this.
This episode is sponsored by Shopify. Before we get into the episode, I'd really appreciate if you take a second to hit subscribe now. Every subscriber matters and helps the show have an opportunity to grow and reach more people. Plus, you'll be the first to hear about what else is coming your way. Thanks for being here. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. This is In Community with Fahad Khawaja. Tyler Chou, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I mean, I know we've been talking about this for a while, so it's an honor to be here.
We have been. I'm really glad I'm able to have you on. I know you have a ton going on. Let's get into it. Can you share a story about a creator that you've worked with or a channel that you've worked with where they really sort of placed a bet on themselves and you were able to strengthen not only their career, but their brand and business as a result?
I'm fortunate that I have many creators in that way. I mean, I won't share who it is, but the creator, who I'm selling for $100 million right now, I've been with him for over 2 years now. And, Fahad, 18 months ago, we went out to market and we asked the market to evaluate how much his business was worth. And they said $35 million. And I actually said to him, I said, I think we should wait. I think because you're not strapped for cash. We were just kind of curious. I think in 3 years, you'll be worth $100 million. And so you took my advice, we waited, and 2 months ago, we went out to market again, and they, in 2 different sets of investment bankers, said that my client was worth probably closer to $100 million. So I was wrong, right? I said it would take 3 years, but it actually took less than a year. And the difference was we built a technical app, right? He has a finance channel. We kind of, by the way, like my clients are doing the work and I'm there advising them and strategizing and protecting them legally. But when they said, we want to do a budgeting app, I said, great, let's find you guys a developer. They didn't want to pay the developers a lot of money up front. So we made a deal where they would, share in the revenue. And that was a way for us to get a developer without having to pay 7 figures in cash. But then we launched the app and it started doing really, really well. And so we were giving these developers a lot of money every month out of the rev share. So I kind of advised them to buy him out. So we bought him out at 6 figures. But, I think this app is going to be worth 20 to 30 million that can be spun off by itself. So it's a good thing. I think we bought, I really guided them and told them that they needed to buy them out. So, every step of the way, I've thought a little further ahead just because like having the corporate experience, a lot of creators either have never had a job or some of them haven't even gone to college, right? So they just don't have that kind of experience working with people or companies to think about, what does it mean to give a rev share to somebody for a long time versus, how much money would we save if we bought them out earlier. And so that's what I do for a lot of my clients.
What made you make the move from what was more of, let's call it the traditional path, into what you're doing now?
So I was in Hollywood for almost 20 years. I worked at studios like Disney, Skydance, and BuzzFeed, as well as some big law firms doing M&A work. About 3 years ago, I had a midlife crisis, and I thought to myself, well, what is my legacy? You know, I've helped so many creatives achieve their creative visions. I've been the lead attorney on 22 feature films. So I started a YouTube channel. You know, I was like, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. I took Ali Abdal's class, PTYA, which was kind of geared towards professionals. That's called Part-Time YouTube Academy. And I did it. He was like 50 videos in a year and you'll get to 1,000 subscribers, right? Because it's very hard to grow on YouTube. So that's what I did. And I put out 2 videos and promptly got very few views, right? Like 200 views. But my third video was about the Try Guys, Ned Fallmer drama. Do you remember that?
I've seen the video, yeah.
Yeah. So I was at Vid Summit when it was still in LA. Someone asked me, because they knew I worked at BuzzFeed. They said, "Do you understand what's happening here? Like, maybe you should go make a video about this." So I went home from Vid Summit. I made a 3-minute video and I said, I think this is what's happening. You know, they probably have a partnership agreement. They probably are exiting Ned out right now. And it exploded. I mean, that one video got like 400,000 views from I probably had 100 subscribers at the time, right? Which I think is a great story for creators to hear, right? You could have the smallest channel in the world, but if you have a good piece of content or at least connected to a trending story, it can really blow up. Like, you don't need huge numbers to do big views on YouTube. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about YouTube and being a creator. You know, I call this the American dream, because no longer do you have to wait for a studio head to deem your story worthy of being told, right? You can just go out there. And if you have the courage to go on camera and tell your story, millions of people can see it. And how powerful is that? Like, at no other time, I think, in the history of Hollywood, have we had that sort of, equal playing field, right? I've probably sat on hundreds of films in development that will never get made, not because the stories aren't good, but because, when I was at Disney, we couldn't release this one film because Paramount just released a similar film 6 months ago. So it's now, I call YouTube the new Hollywood, and I'm incredibly, honored and excited to be supporting creators in this space, because I think there's just so much potential. I mean, private equity money is coming into the space. They're wanting to invest and buy YouTube channels. So it's a very exciting time to be a creator.
It is. Tell me about the steps, though, if you had to think about the sort of 3 key steps that it took you to go from that first video that blew up to saying, you know what, this is my new mission. What were those steps?
Well, I don't know that I've shared this that often, but when I started my YouTube channel, I was actually still working in Hollywood. I was working at a private equity fund. I didn't tell anyone I had started a YouTube channel. I was actually kind of afraid. I didn't even use my name. I would say, I'm Tyler. I never use my last name. When I started, my channel was called The Hollywood Attorney, not The Creator's Attorney. So about a year in, so I had my channel for about a year under the radar. No one really knew because it wasn't that big. I think I had maybe 10,000 subscribers. And then the fund I was with was acquired by MetLife. And my boss, said, don't worry, no changes will be made. But of course, MetLife, after 3 months, took a look at all the numbers and then said, films don't really make any money, do they? So then they shuttered the studios division that I was part of. I was head of business affairs across 3 film companies. And I was laid off. And this was during the WGA and SAG strike. And so there was no jobs out there at my level. I was told by, studios I was too senior, that I should wait. And in that first year when I had my YouTube channel, a lot of creators asked me to represent them. They're like, oh, can you look at my brand deal? Can you, help me figure out this management agreement? And I would always say no, because I was working. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to try. Like while I wait, for the strikes to be over, I'm just going to start a law firm for creators and see how it goes. So I started Tyler Chou Law for Creators. And Fahad, it just blew up. I mean, just so many creators needing someone to protect them, having an adult in the room, because these are creators who are very young. I have a handful of clients who are, Jenny Hoyas was 17 when I first started representing her. She's now 20, right? And so these are young creators without anyone kind of going to bat for them and really shielding them against some very predatory players and agreements in the space. So I guess that was step one, was kind of, still working, getting laid off. And then step two was kind of starting the law firm. And I've had it for about a year and a half now. And now I represent some of the biggest YouTubers in the world as their fractional general counsel and CEO, kind of growing out their business so that they're ready for an exit. And now I just launched my M&A advisory arm called CreatorArq. I just announced in Dubai where I was speaking. I just came back 2 days ago from the 1 billion follower summit. And there's so many people who are interested in this. I released a scorecard. It's called the Tier 1 Creator Exit Scorecard. Over almost 200 people have taken this and are writing me emails directly saying, I want to exit. I don't want to just be on this expensive hamster wheel. I want to figure out how to be a real business, how to get investors, how to get a buyer.
Yeah. No, I understand. And to that point around protection in particular, I see a lot of creators thinking they're fully protected, not necessarily knowing the ins and outs of the legal side of things. There are a ton of blind spots. What are the most common gaps that you tend to see from a legal standpoint when you're working with creators?
I love this question because I have, set answers because it's always the same, right? Creators always ask, oh, Tyler, what are the first few things I need to do to protect myself legally? The first one is, from your first upload, please try to have clean IP, right? The B-rolls that you use, please make sure it comes from a cleared licensing house. Don't do reaction videos. Like that's the biggest, dangerous black hole you can run into, because channels are getting terminated left and right on YouTube right now. I'm sure you're hearing about it. Big channels, copyright strikes are the most terrifying thing for YouTubers. Clean music, right? Use a licensing house like Epidemic Sound. Make sure that you can actually use the music and the license, because that's actually very important later on in your exit. I actually have an imagery that I share in my keynotes is like a 7-step life cycle for creator. So the first step is clean IP from day one on your first upload. Second would be, please start an LLC. Please start, a separate business account. These are very boring things we're talking about, but this has real life implications. If you get sued and you don't have an LLC, and let's say you own a home or you have a savings account, that will get touched and hit during a lawsuit. But if you have an LLC, and it's not just an LLC, you actually have to properly pay yourself on payroll, make sure that, whatever you're making from your YouTube or creator business goes into that account. What's good about having an LLC is you can write off a lot of things, your camera, your laptop, your microphone, everything that's associated with the business, you can write it off, your subscriptions, for Riverside or, different things that your business uses. And then the third step is please have contracts with your independent contractors, with your employees. Please make sure if your independent contractor is under your control and or working for you almost full time, make sure they're actually an employee, right? Because these are all the things that trip people up that I'm seeing as disputes. If you start a channel with a best friend or your spouse, please have a partnership agreement, because I've seen a lot of friendships falling through, people getting divorced. I mean, you look at Sniper Wolf and her husband, they've been in court for 3 years trying to figure out who owns that, $100 million channel. And so And then I think the fourth step is trademarks, really making sure you own your name. If you haven't trademarked your handle name, that is kind of dangerous. I've had to rebrand 3 big YouTubers in the past year, and those are 5 to 6 figures rebranding your entire your courses, your websites, your handle. I mean, it's very expensive. I charge $3,000 for a trademark versus 6-figure for a rebrand. And so if creators can really start thinking about those things, brand deals, contracts, making sure that, look, if you can't hire an attorney, it is okay to run your contract through ChatGPT. I actually think that now. I didn't think that 6 months or a year ago, but now at least just have them flag what are the key issues you see here. Pretend you're a big law firm partner specializing in talent agreements. What are the top 5 issues that I see? Usually it's usage in perpetuity, or owning your name and likeness or format. So if creators can kind of hit those points, they will probably save 90% of headaches down the road. But a lot of creators don't, unfortunately.
So that was 4. If you had to run through 5 through 7 real quick, what would those be?
So 5 is monetization, right? It's like, how do I get monetized? So this is the whole life cycle, right? Monetization is usually AdSense and brand deals. Those are the foundations of your business. But I don't want them to be the only revenue streams you have, because if your YouTube channel goes down tomorrow, do you have an email list? Do you have access to your audience? Can you reach them? Because YouTube doesn't give you access to your data or your audience. You should have many revenue streams. For a year, I said 15, but I actually don't think you should have 15. I think 3 to 5 really solid revenue streams that are off platform, right? Courses, newsletters, a physical product, a technical product, a merch line. If you can get those down, then you're pretty golden, because what investors and private equity funds are looking for are standalone assets that can be sold off on its own. That doesn't require your face. I mean, you look at Feastables, interestingly, Jimmy doesn't put his face on that. Like, it doesn't mention, his name or his face. It's Feastables. And that's very deliberate, right? Because he can sell that on its own. And so having, your mom, Ashley, has Nami not Matcha, that's not her name. So they're very deliberate. And Whaler is a client of mine. So it's like, they're very deliberate in thinking about how to name products, so that it can be, and I know for Ashley, it was like they wanted to do an entire suite of products under that name, right? So it's like divorcing yourself from your face and your name and your product is important in the long-term exit strategy. And number 6 is diversifying those revenue streams, which I just named to you. And then 7 is, are you ready for an exit? And to be ready for an exit, you need to have all those things that I just talked about, but you also probably need to be making at least 3 to 5 million a year in revenue. And if you want to be making sort of north of 80 and 90 million, you need to probably have $8 to $10 million in revenue a year.
Wow. Yeah. And that's stuff that I would imagine most creators, especially if they're growing really fast, they're probably just not thinking about that, right?
No, not at all. I mean, I'll share a story that I shared on LinkedIn after my talk in Dubai, and they, people found out what I was doing. This creator came to me, the boyfriend of the YouTuber, said, "Oh, we'd love to have a conversation with you." So I sat down with them. 30 million subscribers, right? So I'm thinking they must be doing pretty well. I asked them, a lot of questions. Do you have revenue streams? How much are you making? They said that they were making about $1 million a year. I was like, oh, kind of surprising. I thought they'd be making more. So I said, well, tell me, what is that comprised of, And they said it was almost 100% AdSense. And I was not horrified. I was horrified when I asked them if they had an email list, and they said no. Not one email list, right? And I said, so if you stop making content tomorrow, then you're not making any money, correct? And they said, yeah, pretty much. So I said, well, what about merch? I mean, merch is pretty easy, t-shirts, hoodies, mugs. And the creator is actually very well known for always wearing a red hoodie. And they said, yeah, we used to have, a merch line, but then we had a sizing issue. And I said, what do you mean? They're like, well, because they're Asian. They're like, well, Asian sizing is much smaller than the Western world. And in my head, I'm like, but you can just give them the measurements, right? So it felt like there aren't true operators at the helm really thinking about like, how do we actually make this a enterprise business? And they're just not. They're just thinking about what's our next video, what's our content schedule, how do we make more videos, how do we go viral, right? Like how do we get more views? And that is just a trap and a hamster wheel that so many creators are stuck on, and they don't know how to get off.
Sometimes creators do give away rights without knowing that they even gave them away. You mentioned usage, for instance, right? Usage in perpetuity. Whenever I see the words in perpetuity in a contract, I pay attention. My eyes widen, and that's because of my corporate career before doing what I did now. But, how do you help those creators decide what they should hold on to versus what needs to be licensed or shared? How do you help them make those decisions?
Well, we always try to start as restrictive as possible, right? If a brand is coming to you, especially with a low offer, we say, fine, this is for an organic video, one video, no cross posting, you guys you get to use it on your O&O. And then we go up from there. If they want more, if they want boosting or whitelisting, then we add to it. But a lot of creators, when they first get an offer, it's like, oh my God, $1,000. I was going to make this video anyway, and someone's going to pay me 1,000 or 2,000 or even 500 when they're first starting, right? They just don't think to ask these questions. So there are so many of these kind of tier 3 creators who are out there winging it and doing it on their own. They're sometimes too small to even have representation, right? They're too small for agencies or managers or an attorney. And so this is why I love making content. I love going on podcasts and just educating creators. Run it through ChatGPT. Like, ask it what it should look out for. What should they look out for? I am actually creating an AI avatar. It's like an Ask Tyler kind of avatar. I'm working with a great AI company called Echo Bar, and they're going to help me basically download my brain into this avatar. And so creators who can't afford my hourly rate can pay, we haven't like priced it, but like, is it $30 or $50 a month? And just ask me questions. And my hope is to make that accessible to all creators of all sizes so that they can get that type of protection, and it would come along with a contract reader. That's my hope is how do I sort of allow more creators to have access to me, because that's
you're sort of
important.
democratizing access to
Yes.
something that typically is very expensive, but so many people need.
Right.
Yeah, that's amazing. When do you think that would go live, or are you still pretty early stages? This episode is sponsored by Shopify, the platform for those who are serious about building equity in themselves and their businesses. It lowers the barrier between intention and execution, scaling from first-time founder to enterprise operator with infrastructure that I've relied on myself. With the right mix of flexibility and automation, teams stay focused on growth, not maintenance. What's one thing you've known that you should build, but haven't prioritized? What would change if you acted on it now? Start building at Shopify.com.
I'm hoping by this year, I do also have 4 businesses, and I'm writing a book. So, but here's what the tip that most creators who are founders need to understand. you need to outsource, you need to hire, right? So many creators think, well, I need to do everything myself, right? I can't hire an editor because no one can edit like me. No one can know my style, my voice. That's not true. Like Jenny Hoyas, who's my client, like for a long time would not hire an editor. And it finally took her a few years to say, okay, I can't 2x or 3x my output if I'm the bottleneck, right? Most founders are the bottleneck. And so she finally, through the use of roster, found some editors who were really good and trained them. Here's my advice to creators. If someone can do something 80% as good as you, then that frees you up to go do creative things, to do strategy, to grow your business. That's money well spent, right? And through time, those editors or managers or agents, assistants can learn to do everything that you do with, by working day in and day out with you. And I think not growing and not allowing operators to come in is why a lot of creators never grow. For Jenny, I share this because she shares it openly. I've really encouraged her to start long form, right? She's known as the queen of shorts. She goes viral on shorts. She grew from like nothing to 10 million in 2 years based off of her shorts. And I talk about YouTube a lot, right? I don't really talk about Instagram, TikTok as much because I believe to have a true creator business, you have to be on YouTube. You have to create long form. You have to have long libraries that are, 100,000 hours. Private equity funds and streamers and studios want to buy millions of hours of content. So the only way to do that is with long form content. So I've really encouraged her, and she finally, in the last few months, started releasing long form content. So there's a lot of strategy that goes on because I'm always thinking, what does this look like in 5 years or 10 years? What does this look like when investors or private equity funds come to look at your business? And I kind of just I let them do their thing, right? I let them run their business and run their channels and be creative. And then I think about the business end for them.
I want to go back a little bit to something that you mentioned around the growth that you were seeing on channels, right? I mean, some of these creators grow really, really quickly. And, even using Jenny as an example, growth often comes with a lot of pressure. And particularly if you're in a space that is changing rapidly, maybe you haven't had as much exposure to, whether it's monetization or team expansion or audience expectations. How should creators structure their business and their IP to be able to scale from sort of day one?
That's a very nuanced question. For some creators, they have to experiment, right? They might start off doing one type of content, and then based on audience feedback or kind of how the videos perform, they pivot. I think the two niches that do the best generally are wealth and health, right? Because those are two things people care about the most: how to make money or save money and how to live longer, right? And so if you're going to pick a niche, I would say do one of those two, right? And but I've had clients who start doing one thing and then it doesn't quite work. I met someone recently. Actually, that couple that I audited, right, the 30 million YouTuber, I said, because their audience is very young, it's an entertainment channel. I said, could you think about maybe a second channel where your audience is a little older so you actually could sell to them? Because when your audience is under 10, like it's very hard to sell anything, and advertisers are not as interested in working with you, and brands don't really want to do sponsorships as much. And I said, how about wealth or health or wealth? And they were like, well, we were both in finance before we started a YouTube channel. I'm like, oh my goodness, do that. Maybe start a finance channel, And so like, I think there are pivots that have to happen sometimes, especially when you're thinking about like, how do I grow this out to be a business? Maybe having a channel geared towards young children isn't a way to grow this into a business. But I also have the exact opposite example, because Coco Melon sold for a lot of money and they're geared towards very, very young kids. And so I think, but I think they were very strategic and smart in how they grew that out. And they had, a production company, involved in that from day one. So I think what you have to do is you have to be really, really smart and thoughtful about your analytics. I mean, the best creators in the world know their analytics really, really well. Their click-through rate, their their retention, how does the hook do? How does the thumbnail and title do? I mean, Jimmy, like you've heard this, he spends hundreds of hours on his thumbnail and titles before he even ever shoots a video, because the packaging is everything. If you could have the best video in the world, but if people don't click on your video, it doesn't matter.
If there's one non-negotiable that you want creators to take away as something that they should follow from everything that we've talked about, what is that?
I think we touched upon it, which is really creating a product that is not dependent on your face. I can't stress that enough. You have to almost divorce yourself from your ego and your personality and have a product that will sell really well to people beyond your audience, right? Because, I mean, I always go back to Feastables. Yes, Jimmy's audience is very young, but I think many people buy his chocolates, right? Like adults buy his chocolate. And I think he's done something really, really smart there. He's just has an obsessive personality, but he, you know, reached out to every single chocolate company in the world, like toured them and like read every book on chocolate making. I mean, he wanted to make the best chocolate in the world. I mean, I know the ingredients have changed, as he has gone mass market, but I think his original goal was to make a healthier, better chocolate. And that really appealed to a lot of people beyond his audience, right? So how do you make a product that millions of people will buy? And that is not so easy to do sometimes. So technical product, if anything, if you take away anything, I think technical products are better than physical products. Technical product, you build it once, you can sell it 1 million, 10 million, 100 million times. Physical products, you have to deal with manufacturing and distribution and customer service and returns. And so there are a lot of things that go into and then if you do foods, like consumer products are also very hard. The margins are not great. What if people get sick? So there are a lot more things you have to think about with a physical product, but with technical product, they're great. Like that's my favorite. If you're going to build something, build an app.
So my final sort of work-related question that I have for you is actually from the brand and marketer perspective. You work with a ton of companies who are doing deals with creators, right? They're actual brands doing deals with creators. What advice would you give to a brand leader or a marketing leader who wants to work with creators?
I think understanding that, I think the old model was we're going to build a product and then find an audience, right? And now it's like creators have the audience. They often just don't have the product. So how do you think about, and I think the shift has happened. I mean, I think last year, um, so many companies came out and said, I think it was Unilever, right? Who said like, oh, we're gonna allot 50% of our ad spend to creators in the digital media space. And they own 400 brands, right? I think when that happened, people kind of all sat up and started to think, oh, so these aren't just kids making videos in their bedrooms anymore. These are actually companies that we should approach more like a B2B, right? Like you are approaching a creator who is a business. So how would two businesses do a deal together? This isn't some kid, that you're trying to pay a couple $1,000s to. This is a company that has a deep, loyal audience in the millions. And how do you work with them. I'm a big fan of working with creators where they're brand ambassadors. They become the face of the brand. You do a 6 or 12 month, partnership integration, because this, you're a marketer, like the rule of 7, right? Your audience has to hear you say something 7 times usually to buy from you. So having those longer campaigns versus one-offs, right? I don't think one-offs work for either side, the brand or the creator, because you're not getting any real metrics that show that a one-off brand deal is that successful. So I really think if you can think of creators as a business, approach a creator with wanting to create a relationship. I mean, you look at Alex Earl when she became the face of Poppy. I mean, she helped that brand do really well, and in the exit that they had, and she probably had a very nice exit too. Like, that is success on both sides. And speaking of Poppy, offer creators equity, make them part owner, and really invest it in your success. Sometimes it doesn't cost very much. I mean, you still have to pay them cash, right? But like giving them a little bit of equity really brings them in as almost an owner. And I think that's very powerful.
And they are, right? They're entrepreneurs, they're founders. And, as an entrepreneur and a founder on your end as well, shifting gears a bit, I want to understand the answer to a tough question, I feel like, when you are an entrepreneur, which is, how do you, with everything going on, take care of your health and well-being?
It's become my biggest priority right now. I mean, a few months ago, I don't know if you read on LinkedIn, but I burnt out. I mean, I have been working 18-hour days for about 700 days. And I think my body just kind of was like, no more. Like, I had a huge earache that I could not, I thought I had an ear infection. I was supposed to actually go speak at the Aspen Institute, and I couldn't get on an airplane. I actually haven't flown from like October to January. Like, I'm always speaking, I'm traveling around the world, and my body finally just said, nope, not going to let you do it anymore. And it made me rest. It made me slow down. And I took a hard look at how hard I was pushing myself, because I wasn't, I'm always I always push myself to always be there for my clients and go to war for them. But I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't really even taking care of my team. And I had to reassess. And now, my Whoop is right here. I took it off for the call, but I prioritize my sleep. I prioritize walks every day, meditating, because without it, like, nothing else can run, right? Like, if I'm not in a good mental space, like, I'm not able to create or be creative. I mean, I just did that video about the $100 million exit, and I was able to be creative again, because I had a little bit of bandwidth, and I felt a little, my mind got a little quieter, and you can't create if your mind is very, very loud and chaotic.
100% could not agree more. If someone wants to follow in your footsteps, what's the one thing that you would say as a piece of advice for them?
There are a lot of young attorneys, who are coming out to me. Some right in law school or right out of law school, and they think, oh, I'm just going to go do what Tyler is doing. And I would say, as hard as Hollywood was, I had some very challenging bosses and jobs. They were training grounds for me. I think going in-house, going through being an in-house attorney, understanding how a business is run, and all the risks that come along with it, employment issues, getting sued, all those things get taught at a company in-house. You work at a law firm, there's really precise, amazing training that happens. I think you have to kind of go through that trial by fire to learn. I worry about attorneys, right out of law school, who are thinking, I can go do this, because who has trained them? Like, no one has trained them, because I've experienced this where these young attorneys will come to me asking me for advice, and they're like, yeah, so like one of my clients who's a YouTuber is letting this person go, but this employee is like unhappy. So like, what do we do? And I'm like, give them a severance, like give them 2 weeks, have them sign a piece of paper. And he was like, Oh, wow. I didn't even know that. Do you know what I mean? Because they haven't been trained anywhere. They haven't been through corporate world. They don't understand sort of very simple answers that they would have learned in-house or they would have learned at a law firm. So I would definitely say every time you go through something tough, you learn a lot from it. So um, having proper training is important. Um, and realizing that when you represent creators, if you want to be a creator attorney, if that's the question, representing creators is very chaotic. I have an attorney right now who's working for me, and he has been, in Hollywood the last 5 years doing film productions, and he's having a hard time wrapping his head around how disorganized, the creators can be, not responding to us, when we ask legal questions or input. Brands giving us contracts that looks like it's been like cobbled together with 5 different, contracts that they just cut and paste themselves. And so it's definitely challenging in that way, right? Where you're dealing with maybe less sophisticated parties than you would in corporate America or in Hollywood.
You've gotten to a point where your career went in directions you didn't necessarily expect. Most people would look at what you're doing and say you're very successful in so many different ways. Take me back to one of your earliest memories.
So I actually was born in Taiwan and grew up there. I came to the States when I was 7. One of my earliest memories, this is going to be wild because I talk about, growing up working in the swap meets a lot in the US, but actually, when I was born, my dad was one of the wealthiest entrepreneurs in Taiwan. He was creating computer chips for toys at the time. And so I had my own chauffeur slash bodyguard because kidnapping kids in Asia was kind of a thing. I think it still is of wealthy, families. And I had my own bodyguard. There was this yellow Mercedes that would drive me around. That's sort of one of my first memories. But by the way, from the age of 7 to 18, I worked in the swap meets every weekend. Okay, so that's kind of like the contrast between the two memories that I have. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Why do you think that's one of the earliest things you think of?
Maybe because there was a photo, and my mom would maybe like talk about it a lot. She would think about the good old days, right? When when we had a chauffeur and when we, actually had some type of stature and position. Because growing up so poor in the U.S., it was always harder, I think, for her than anybody else. Because I didn't really have those memories, right? Those were more her memories, but she would talk about it a lot, and so I think. I would, there was a photo of me in front of the yellow Mercedes. And so I don't know. I think it's that immigrant trauma, maybe.
So tell me then more about what growing up was like. What was the community like? What were your surroundings like, especially knowing that, you were born in one place, but then moved to another? And what was that experience like?
Sure. So I grew up in the Ontario, Claremont area, about an hour outside of LA. And interestingly, I was one of, this is way back when, and in the 80s and 90s, and I was one of the only Asian families, in that area at the time. Like now, there are Asians all over Southern California, but at that time, I was the only Asian. I remember, being made fun of. I remember the first time, my mom packed a lunch, and she did. I'm sure it was some fish and rice, and it was not well received. So after that point, it was just sandwiches, which I didn't even really like, but that's what I had was, yeah, that experience of, oh, don't be different, don't be an outsider, and how to like assimilate. And so that was sort of what it felt like growing up. But, it wasn't terrible. It wasn't like I was bullied every day. It was just like I knew I was different. And I always kind of felt it kind of growing up in that area.
Do you feel like as you were growing up then and, felt that difference that it helped you figure out what your superpower is?
Not for a long time. When you're growing up, it just is awful, when you're different. But I think now I really own up to it. I love it. But I think for a long time, I was in Hollywood for almost 20 years, and I don't know that I loved being different. I don't know that I loved being mistaken as, the assistant in the boardroom when I was one of the executives there. So, I don't know that I loved it when I was young, but I think ultimately, yes, I think that became my superpower. Being an underdog really propelled me into sort of my life's mission right now to protect creators and protect the underdogs.
All right. So to close things out, we're going to do a quick lightning round. Are you
Okay,
ready?
let's do it. Yes.
Okay. So it'll just be quick answers, no time to think, no time to explain. All right.
Okay.
Comedy or drama?
Oh, comedy.
Teleportation or time travel?
Oh, teleportation. I want both, but okay. Yes.
Breakfast, sweet or savory?
Savory, for sure.
What's your go-to hype song?
The Man by Taylor Swift.
Why?
Because that's like my motto is like, to be for a woman, it's so different, right? Like we have to pass so many different tests and the bar is so much higher for us. And for a man, it's just like, it's a given almost. Sorry, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, you don't have to apologize. I know. Yeah, no. That's great. Well, listen, that is it for me. I really appreciate you making the time and thanks for being on the show.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. This was my pleasure.